The smell of hospital-grade disinfectant usually makes me nauseous, but tonight, it smelled like a sanctuary. I stood in the doorway of the ICU, watching my mother's chest rise and fall with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. She looked so small, a fragile bird lost in a sea of white linens. This woman, who had worked 3 jobs after my father died when I was 5, who had calloused hands and a heart made of pure gold, was fading. "I've got her, Elena. Go home and rest," a soft voice whispered behind me. I felt a warm hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus, my husband, my rock. Or so I thought. He looked at my mother with such convincing pity that I felt a surge of love for him. I didn't know then that he was secretly hoping the machine would stop. I didn't know that the medication he had brought her earlier that week was actually a slow-acting toxin designed to mimic heart failure. I didn't know that while I was crying over her bedside, he was checking the balance of an offshore account he had built using her medical savings. "You're such a good man, Marcus," I whispered, leaning my head against his chest. "I'm just doing what a husband should," he replied. His voice was smooth, like expensive velvet, but his eyes were already on the clock. He had a flight to catch in 4 hours, a business trip that was actually a luxury getaway with a woman named Sabrina. "The spotlight is about to dim, Elena," he thought, a secret smile playing on his lips. "And when it does, I'm the only one walking away with the light." My mother, Margaret, was a force of nature. After my father passed away, she didn't just survive, she conquered. She was a seamstress by day and a janitor by night, all to ensure I went to the best schools. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table late at night, her eyes red from strain, sewing the final buttons on a dress for a client so she could buy me a new set of paints for my art class. "Education and integrity, Elena," she would say, her voice tired but firm. "Those are the only things no one can ever take from you. Build yourself high, so you can reach back and pull others up." When I finally became a successful interior architect, my first act was to buy her a house, a sun-drenched cottage with a garden full of the roses she loved. But shortly after, she fell ill, a mysterious, lingering fatigue that the doctors couldn't quite name. I stepped back from my firm, putting my career on hold to move her into my home. That was when Marcus stepped in. We had been married for 4 years. He was an investment consultant, a man who spoke in numbers and promises. He insisted on managing our joint savings so I could focus on emotional care. "Don't worry about the hospital bills, Elena," he said, kissing my temple. "I've set up a specialized healthcare fund. Every penny we've saved is going to get your mother the best specialists in Europe. You just hold her hand. I'll hold the world together." I felt like the luckiest woman alive. My mother adored him. Even in her weakened state, she would smile when he entered the room. "He's a keeper, Elena," she'd whisper. "A man who loves your mother as much as you do is a man you can trust with your life." But the perfection of the fairy tale was a calculated illusion. The first crack appeared when I went to the pharmacy to pick up a refill for my mother's heart medication. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne," the pharmacist said, looking at his screen with a frown. "The insurance was declined. There seems to be a stop payment order on the primary account linked to this profile." "That's impossible," I said, my heart skip-thudding. "My husband just transferred the quarterly premium yesterday." "Check again. It's not just the premium, ma'am. The entire policy has been flagged for potential fraud due to inconsistent medical reports. We can't dispense this unless you pay the full $500 in cash." I paid it, chalking it up to a banking error. When I confronted Marcus, he was ready with a perfect explanation. "It's those damn offshore regulations, Elena. I moved the funds to a higher yield account to maximize our interest. The transfer just got caught in a compliance check. I'll fix it in the morning." "Stop being so paranoid. The stress is making you see ghosts." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was the man who sat with me through the long nights. He was the man who brought my mother soup. But then, the red flags started to scream. Marcus became obsessively protective of his second phone, a device he claimed was for secure international clients. He would take client calls in the middle of the night, standing on the balcony in the freezing cold, his voice a low, frantic murmur. He started traveling more, claiming that the economic shift required him to be in the city for days at a time. One afternoon, while he was at the office, I found a receipt in the pocket of his coat. It was for a diamond bracelet, one I hadn't received. The purchase date was 2 weeks ago, on my mother's birthday. The same day, he told me he couldn't afford to hire a private nurse because we needed to conserve the medical fund. The blood in my veins turned to liquid nitrogen. I didn't confront him. My mother's health was plunging. She was having seizures, bizarre, localized tremors that the doctors said didn't match her diagnosis. Marcus was always the one to give her the evening vitamins. She looks so peaceful after she takes them, he'd say, watching her drift into a heavy, unnatural sleep. I waited until he was gone for another 3-day conference. I didn't go to the bank. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. I went to a private toxicology lab. I took one of those vitamins and a sample of the water he kept on her bedside table. While I waited for the results, I did a deep dive into our digital life. I used a keylogger I had installed on his laptop months ago, out of a nagging, guilt-ridden curiosity. What I found wasn't just a betrayal, it was a massacre of my trust. Marcus wasn't just investing our money. He was siphoning it. Every dollar I had earned, every cent of my mother's pension that she had signed over to us for safekeeping, was being moved through a labyrinth of shell companies. The destination? A private offshore account in the Cayman Islands, under the name Sabrina and Marcus Holdings. Sabrina wasn't a client. She was his mistress, a high-end lifestyle influencer who was currently posting photos from a yacht in the Mediterranean. A yacht that was being paid for by my mother's life-saving fund. But the most devastating find was a document titled Liability Assessment. It was a legal draft prepared by a shady attorney. Marcus was planning to file for divorce the moment my mother passed away. The document detailed how he would claim that I had mismanaged the funds, that I was the one who had accumulated massive debts through unauthorized luxury spending, and that he should be awarded the house and the remaining assets as a victim of marital fraud. He was setting me up to be a homeless, penniless orphan. The toxicology report arrived via email at 3 a.m. I sat in the dark kitchen, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my tear-filled eyes. Sample analysis. Trace amounts of digitalis and synthetic sedatives found in water and capsules. In consistent doses, these levels would not kill immediately but would induce cardiac stress, seizures, and cognitive decline, simulating the progression of a terminal heart condition. He wasn't just stealing our money. He was killing my mother to get to the finish line faster. He was laughing at her illness, mocking her struggle, and using her slow death as a theatrical backdrop for his own enrichment. I remembered him laughing at the dinner table a month ago when my mother forgot a word. "She's losing it, Elena," he had said with a smirk, thinking I wouldn't notice the cruelty. "Maybe we should just stop the expensive treatments. It's a waste of resources at this point, don't you think?" I had defended him then, thinking he was just tired from the caretaking. I was such a fool. I walked into my mother's room. She was awake, her eyes clouded with pain. She reached out her hand, her fingers trembling. "Where's Marcus?" she whispered. "Is he okay?" Even now, she was worried about him. The man who was slipping poison into her glass. I took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "He's fine, Mom. He is exactly where he deserves to be." I didn't cry. The time for tears had died with the toxicology report. I felt a cold, sharp blade of resolve slide into my spine. I was no longer the grieving daughter or the oblivious wife. I was a predator who had just found her target. I spent the next 48 hours in a silent frenzy of countermoves. I called my father's old friend, a high-stakes corporate lawyer who lived for the kind of financial warfare Marcus was playing. "He thinks he's clever because he's using offshore accounts," the lawyer told me over an encrypted line. "But he made one fatal mistake, Elena. He used your joint IP address to access those accounts. And because you are a co-owner of the primary source of that money, you have the legal right to track its movement." "I don't just want the money back, Thomas," I said, looking at the sleeping form of my mother. "I want him to feel the walls closing in. I want him to realize that the debts he planned for me are the only things he'll have left." "We're going to set up a family trust, Elena," Thomas explained. "We'll move every asset you have a claim to, the house, your firm's intellectual property, and the remaining liquid savings, into a protected trust for your mother's care. Since he's already declared those funds as medical expenses in his internal ledgers, he can't contest the move without admitting to tax fraud." "And the offshore account?" I asked. "Oh, the IRS loves a good offshore account," Thomas chuckled darkly. "We aren't going to tell him we found it. We're going to let him keep pouring money into it. And then, on the day he thinks he's winning, We're going to tip off the Department of Justice. Marcus returned from his conference the next day, smelling of expensive perfume and sea salt. He walked into the house with a fake sigh of exhaustion, dropping his bags by the door. "How is she, honey?" he asked, walking toward the kitchen to pour himself a drink. "Any more episodes?" I looked at him, my face a perfect mask of the distressed wife. "She's getting worse, Marcus. I think we need to talk about the trust you mentioned before. The one for her long-term care." "Of course, darling," he said, his eyes gleaming with greed. He thought I was finally handing him the keys to the kingdom. "I've already got the papers ready. We just need to sign them tonight." I looked at the pen in his hand. He thought it was a tool to steal my life. He had no idea it was the shovel I was going to use to bury him. "Let's do it, Marcus," I said, smiling at him. "Let's make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve." The pen felt heavy in my hand, but not because of guilt. It was the weight of justice. As I signed the documents for the family trust, Marcus stood behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of fake comfort. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating how much he could siphon from this new secure fund. He didn't realize that the lawyer standing in our living room wasn't the junior associate he expected, but Thomas, a man who had already spent the afternoon sharing Marcus's offshore bank codes with the Financial Crimes Division. "There," I said, putting the pen down. "It's done. Everything my mother and I own is now protected for her care." "You did the right thing, Elena," Marcus purred, picking up the papers with a greed he could barely mask. "I'll take these to the bank tomorrow. Why don't you go sit with Margaret?" "I think she needs her evening vitamins." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, Marcus. I think she's had enough of your medicine." The next morning, the trap was sprung. Marcus woke up early, whistling as he dressed in a tailored suit, ready to finalize his divorce strategy and move the trust funds into his Cayman account. He was so confident that he didn't even notice the two black sedans parked down the street. I was in the kitchen, feeding my mother some real fresh broth, the first meal she'd had in months that wasn't laced with his toxins. Her eyes were clearer, the fog of the sedatives finally lifting. "Elena," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "Is it over?" "Almost, Mom," I said, squeezing her hand. "Just watch the door." At exactly 9 a.m., Marcus walked into the kitchen, his briefcase in hand. He stopped when he saw me. He didn't see the broken, grieving wife he had been gaslighting. He saw a woman standing tall, wearing the same fierce expression my mother used to wear when she was fighting for our survival. "Elena? Why aren't you at the hospital?" he asked, his voice tightening. "The bank called, Marcus," I said, leaning against the counter. "It seems there's a problem with your investment accounts." "All of them, including the ones in the Caymans." The color drained from his face so fast it was like a curtain falling. I don't know what you're talking about." "What accounts?" "The ones you shared with Sabrina," I said, tossing his second phone onto the table. "The one you used to pay for the yacht. The one you built using my mother's blood and my father's legacy." He lunged for the phone, but I was faster. I stepped back as the front door was kicked open. It wasn't a messy entrance. It was the silent, terrifying arrival of the IRS and the FBI. "Marcus Thorne?" the lead agent asked. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of international money laundering, tax evasion, and, most importantly, felony pharmaceutical tampering." "Tampering?" Marcus stammered, his eyes darting toward the sink where he usually prepared the vitamins. "That's ridiculous. I was caring for her." "We have the toxicology reports, Marcus," I said, my voice like ice. "And we have the video from the nanny cam I hidden in the kitchen 3 days ago. The one that shows you crushing those pills into her water while laughing about how the old lady is finally checking out." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus's facade crumbled. He didn't go out like a mastermind. He went out screaming. He screamed at me, calling me a traitor, screaming that he would take everything in the divorce. "There is no divorce, Marcus," I said as they led him toward the door. "I've already filed for an annulment based on criminal fraud. You were never my husband. You were just a long-term burglar. And since you've been declaring zero income to avoid taxes while hiding millions offshore, the government is seizing every penny in those accounts as back taxes and penalties. You aren't leaving me with debts. You're leaving with nothing but a prison number." News of Marcus's arrest hit the community like a lightning strike. But the most satisfying part was the reaction of his own family. His father, a retired judge who valued honor above all else, came to the house a few days later. He didn't come to defend his son. He came to apologize. We knew he was ambitious, Elena, the old man said, his head bowed in shame. But we never imagined he was a monster. To hurt a sick woman, to mock a mother's struggle, there is no forgiveness for that. He handed me a box. It contained the diamond bracelet I had seen the receipt for. The police found this in his mistress's apartment. I made sure they returned it to the rightful owner. Use it to pay for your mother's real doctors. I didn't keep the bracelet. I sold it and used the money to start a small foundation in my mother's name, the Margaret Shield, a legal advocacy group for elderly people who are being financially or physically abused by their caregivers. The recovery was slow, but it was beautiful. Without the vitamins Marcus was feeding her, my mother's heart stabilized. Her seizures stopped. Within 3 months, she was back in her garden, her calloused hands pruning the roses she loved. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she looked at me and smiled. The gray, sallow look was gone. She looked like the warrior she had always been. You did it, Elena, she said. You built yourself high, just like I told you. I did it because you taught me how to recognize a fake, Mom, I replied. Marcus was eventually sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Sabrina, his mistress, vanished the moment his accounts were frozen, leaving him to face the music alone. He sent me letters from prison, filled with regret and love, begging for a second chance. I never opened them. I sent them back marked, "Return to sender." Recipient doesn't exist. I went back to my career but with a different perspective. I didn't just design beautiful spaces anymore. I designed secure ones. I became an advocate for women's financial independence, teaching young girls that trust is something you earn every day, not something you give away with a wedding ring. My mother lived for another 10 years. 10 years of laughter, travel, and seeing the foundation grow. When she finally passed away, it wasn't in a cold ICU room filled with poison. It was in her own bed, surrounded by flowers, with her hand in mine, knowing that she was safe, loved, and vindicated. I stood at her funeral, looking at the crowd of people she had helped through the Margaret Shield. I realized then that Marcus thought he was the smart one. He thought he could outrun the truth, because he had the numbers on his side. But he forgot the most important lesson my mother ever taught me. Numbers can be forged, but integrity is a legacy that never dies. To the daughters and wives listening, never let a man manage your emotions while he manages your money. If he tries to isolate you from your family, if he mocks the people who raised you, or if he tells you that you're too stressed to look at the bank statements, run. Your mother's struggle wasn't a waste of resources, and your love isn't a liability. You are the guardian of your family's history. Don't let a predator rewrite it. I am Elena. I am a strong daughter, a survivor of a hollow marriage, and the keeper of a mother's mercy. And I will never let the light be stolen again. Now, I have to ask you, have you ever felt that your kindness was being treated as a weakness? Have you ever noticed a partner trying to fix your family problems by making you the problem? How do we teach the next generation to spot the difference between a protector and a predator? Let's share our strength in the comments, because a mother's love is a shield, but a daughter's truth is a sword.